Thank you, everyone who wanted to attend the Focus on Inclusion conference. It was held in the first week of February. I'm well aware that many of you, due to travel restrictions, snow restrictions, and whatsoever, were unable to participate. So what we're doing is we're putting together this recording so that you can get the information. You shouldn't be prevented from receiving the information just because a whole heap of snowflakes and ice caused you significant problems. And I appreciate all your participation. For those of you who did attend, a number of you came to this session that I did. We had a great question and answer session. And some of the comments and things you'll hear as embedded as a part of this. But I just want to let you know that I appreciate all of what you do as educators. And I hope I made this clear, is that I come from a family of educators. Education is what we do. And I'm very proud to be an educator. It's what we do. My dad was my superintendent of schools. He's now executive director of the Urban Superintendents Association of America. My sister's a reading specialist and been a billing level administrator. My wife teaches ESL. My daughter is about to get her master's in special education. The only one who's missing in this is my son, who is heavily involved in the cryptocurrency world. He doesn't know it, but he's going to be a teacher someday. We just for his own sanity, it's going to happen, because the cryptocurrency world is kind of strange. But he also may be richer than all of us combined. But I share this with you, is that what I want to highlight for you is the IDOE is requesting feedback on the IEP system. And so we have this. You've probably seen this at other points, but I just want to share this with you, that you all should respond to this. It's important that you have an opportunity. It's important that you have an opportunity to participate. It's important that your voices are heard. And so just kind of emphasize that as a part of this. Okay. So here I am. So here's information about me, a little bit about this. We're going to basically talking to administrators on how you can support others for inclusion and why this is important. Because one of the things that we want to emphasize is that the importance of this is that you can be of assistance to others, and you can be a benefit to others. And what we have to think about is all the supports. Because one of the things we have to highlight, and I'm not sugarcoating this, is that teachers often do what the administrators allow them to do. And when as the leaders of the buildings and leaders to what's going on, you are the ones that can really push and move the system, and you can direct and emphasize, but you're also the point person as building level administrators, who are those working in that role. You're the ones who are the point persons for parents. You're the point persons for general education staff. And so what's your role in this is vital. There's some books that the IEP Resource Center has been pushing out on this topic that I've co-authored. I know they were passing out books, a special education administration textbook, that there was the Principal's Guide to Special Education. There's a case study book. There's a variety of information. Our goal is to try to improve services for kids eligible for special education related services, and to make sure that everyone is aware of this, and that everyone who can provide supports can. And so that's what we're pushing for. And if there's supports or questions that you can have down the road that might be beneficial to you, please let me know. I'm going to give you an email address, and I'll share this with you at the end. I apologize that it's not on here, but my email address is my name, David Bateman, that's all one word, at me.com. Those of you who are Apple aficionados understand where this comes from. It's not anything that I came up with, but it's when I logged into my iCloud years ago, they gave me that email address. But but again, it's davidbateman@me.com. If down the road you have questions that I might be of assistance, might be beneficial to provide helps and supports for you, please let me know. Real quickly, there's a description about me in the program, but there's some things that have changed since then. I'm working as a neutral fact finder in a class action lawsuit against the Oregon Department of Education. That's my current work right now. And so I'm spending a lot of time in a different time zone. And I'm traveling to Oregon on a regular basis, working with individuals out there regarding a class action lawsuit against ODE. So that's where I'm spending my time. I spend a lot of my time dealing with lawsuits, witness preparation, consulting with school boards on what they need to do, just helping make determinations, yay or nay, about whether parties should move forward in litigation, and then working on professional development afterwards when there's been a problem. So so much of the resources that I'm going to be telling you about, the IEP Resource Center has, and we're going to do what we can to get this out to you so that you can benefit from it. But my goal, again, is to reduce litigation. And I really do strive for this. I really do this. I was a due process hearing officer for 10 years. I worked as a hearing officer. I live in a litigious state. I live in Pennsylvania right now. I'm moving in a few months, but I live in a litigious state, and the state I live in, I heard just shy of 600 due process hearings, wrote decisions on all variety of topics as a hearing officer. I've since been involved in a number of due process hearings. Have not consulted on a due process hearing since about 2 hours ago. So I'm on break right now, which is good. But what's interesting about this is I work with school districts across the nation trying to help this, and increasingly parent groups who have reached out to me to help provide assistance on this. I was heavily involved in the ACLU versus Flint lawsuit and involving the water crisis, and so I've been involved in some of the big cases, and I'm helping lay the foundation in 2 states right now for class action lawsuits against states. So I'm hyper current on what's going on, but I have resources that I want to get out to you. So just look at this. All right. So some of the resources that we have that we want to get out to you. The first, whether you've read this or not, I highly recommend that you read it. The first, many of you, when you went through your special education training and special education, if you took special education law a few years ago, the main case that you read was about Amy Rowley. It was a case from 1982. It was the first Supreme Court case on special education. It's important because it laid the foundation for how we define a free, appropriate public education. It was a bad case. It was in many respects, things like this. Amy Rowley is an individual with a superior IQ. There are various reports that her IQ was somewhere between 137 and 142, which is not typical of most kids eligible for special education and related services. Why this is important is that laid the foundation for the educational benefit analysis that many of you are doing as applying whether a child received a FAPE. What they did is 25 years after the case, they had her write a personal narrative about what it was like to be the focus of the case. And it's important now. She's obviously a very intellectual, a very intelligent individual. She's a professor now in the California State University system, and has a PhD, and she's a very good writer, and I appreciate the perspective that she provides. And so it's a good read because you can talk about from a personal narrative what's it's like about this. We're going to send you what it was like 25 years after this. Second thing we're going to send you that we have available for you is we have the Supreme Court case decision in the Andrew F. case from 2017. Just 5 years ago, this is a case that laid the foundation for the new change and what we expect as part of a FAPE for kids. Prior to this, as a result of the Rowley case, it was kids need to receive a benefit. Now kids need to make progress. And this case laid that foundation and talked about this. Why this is important is I'm betting most of you have not read a Supreme Court case. That's okay. You're not expected on this. But the Supreme Court justices are very good writers. And this is a case that you have a background, you have an understanding, read this, really understand this. It was written by Chief Justice John Roberts. It was really well done. It was a rare unanimous Supreme Court case. And that's something you should pay attention to because pay attention to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court will they end their term in June. That's why they'll be on the front page of your paper. You don't have to go looking for them. They'll be on the front page of your newspapers, if those of you who get newspapers, but the front page of the headlines. They're going to be rare unanimous decisions, but it was a unanimous decision. But it helped codify what we mean about kids making progress. And it really is a good read. And it's only 16, 17 pages. It won't take you a long time. It will not put you to sleep. I have other things that will put you to sleep. But it's a really good thing that help as part of this. But I do recommend that you read this. The third thing that we have available for you is after the Supreme Court case, the U.S. Department of Education decided to put out some frequently asked questions on the Andrew Supreme Court case from their perspective about what you should be providing. This is a document that I truly recommend that you read and that you get out to your team because it talks not just about the kids need to make academic progress, but kids need to make functional progress and adjust their behaviors and improve what's going on as a result of this. This is vital because too often we have all sorts of academic data on kids. What we also need to get is behavioral data on kids. And this is a way to help remind us of this important thing, because the case involved a student, little Andrew, Drew is what he was referred to in the court case, who had some significant behavior problems. It wasn't all academics, despite the fact, yes, they didn't have any real good progress monitoring data about whether he was making progress, but he had some behavior issues that were not being addressed. And so this is something that we need to remind us. It's not just about academics, it's also about behaviors. That's an important thing. The next thing we're going to send to you as a result of the Andrew Supreme Court case in 2017, the U.S. Department of Education decided that they needed to come up with legally compliant IEP modules on how to write a legally compliant IEP. So they have two modules. They're on their IRIS website. We'll send you the links for them. They're free. Everything we're sending you so far is free. Just be excited about this. But it's all free stuff that you can use. But it's free modules. The first is a module for teachers, what they need to know about what a legally compliant IEP is. The module takes about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. And I'm betting, even though you may have teachers who are really good, that they're still going to learn stuff. I really do mean this. The second module is an IEP module for administrators, building level administrators and special ed administrators, what they need to know as a part of their role in a legally compliant IEP. The U.S. Department of Education reached out to Mitch Yell and me. We wrote them in conjunction with each other. They're free. They truly are free. What I'm really recommending on this, and it was tough. It was one of the hardest things that that I've written in a long time, because it had to go through 7 layers of lawyer vetting to ensure that it had the US DOE stamp of approval. These modules are being heavily used in many states and 2 of our territories to ensure that we have a sense of what a legally compliant IEP is, because it's a great background knowledge. My recommendation is that many of you have great staff and great training, is that you have your teachers go through the modules about a week before you do a meeting with them. Again, it's free stuff. You have them go through this module, spend an hour and a half on this, and they're ticking in the doors that they've done the module, and they come with questions. And then you answer the specific questions about what this means. The same thing with building level principles. Have them go through the module and have them do this, and then you sit there and go through this. You don't need to bring anyone from the outside to do the answers to the questions. You just need to have them bring the questions about what do we do, how do we do this, how this is implemented, and what we need to pay attention to this. Again, it's a free module for you. And it provides great resources. And while you're looking at if you haven't spent time at the IRIS module website, spend time. Just type in, for those of you who can't wait to see the documents we're sending you, just in your Google or whatever your search engine is, type in IRIS modules Vanderbilt. And what that do, they're all housed at Vanderbilt University. People at Vanderbilt are not the ones writing them. They contract out with all these people, but they're housed there. And there's modules on behavior management. There's modules on progress monitoring. There's modules on talking with parents. There's modules on dealing with COVID. And these are all modules that they've spent a lot of time on, and a lot of things like this. I get no royalties on this. They paid me up front. It's good. But thousands more people I don't get any money out of this. So it's a great resource. Truly is a great resource. And I recommend that you get them out to your team. The next thing we have available for you is a piece that I wrote. Is I only work with 30 school districts each year. I keep it limited on a number of districts I do direct consulting with. I try to keep it limited so I can invest the time and energy, because otherwise I'm stretched too far. But what I did is I surveyed the 30 school districts that I work with and asked them what are the most common disabilities they have for needs of 504 accommodations. And as a result of that, what I did is I wrote a piece for them on how to write a 504 accommodation plan. And I know many of you in special education, this is not your responsibility, but please get this out to whomever might benefit. Mitch Yell and I are going to be turning this into a book, so get it out to whomever might benefit now while you can. Why I share this with you is that it goes through a difference between accommodations, modifications, how to actually step-by-step write a 504 plan. And then for the 30 most common disabilities that they have, what we have is a description of the disability, like a sample description, 3 or 4 valid websites that you can go for additional information, then 25 to 30 possible accommodations for that specific disability. what you can do is you can get this out to your school counselor, your assistant principals, who are the ones responsible for writing 504s. And what they do is read that section. And when they come in, and what they have to do is just spend 3 or 4 minutes before the 504 meeting, read that page on those disabilities. They're now in the ballpark to talk to parents who may be anxious about how to work with this child, what supports are necessary as a part of this. And they can talk and talk the talk and really reduce the anxiety. All they have to do is read that one page and they're good to go. From what I understand, this is being used in statewide by 19 states and 2 of our territories. I do work in 2 of our territories. That's how I know. But it's interesting about this. It's a wonderful document. And I really do recommend it. We'll get it out to you. It's free. But it's a great resource out there. The next thing is a copy of a book called the Pre-Referral Intervention Manual. And what it is basically guidance on how to deal with behaviors. And there's no narrative, there's no pictures, there's no exclamation points, but what it has is information that can provide assistance on dealing with behaviors. It's a third copy of the PDF of the 3rd edition. It's well circulated on the internet. You can get it yourself if you do your search, but this is a way to provide assistance for you to help you guide this. The 4th edition is on the internet, is available at Amazon for I think $119. But this is a document that you should get out to your teams and help with this. The next document that we're going to be sending to you is a document for general education teachers. Why I share this with you is that general education teachers often don't get a lot of training on what the comments are that they need to write for an IEP, what the comments they need to write for an evaluation report or reevaluation on how a child is doing in their class. And what this shows is information of what a good general education teacher should write up as a part of a kid. Now, because I know many of you are just pulling teeth trying to get general education teachers to get this information for you. This will help you with that information. Now, you might get the same kind of format from other teachers in the future. That's great. I mean, that's all you're getting. That's fine. The problem is general education teachers don't know what to do. So what they often do is they don't know if you want 1 sentence or 700 words. So they shut down. This gives them a model of what one looks like and gives them some expectations of how to do this. We'll get this out to you. It's from I think it's chapter 2 from a book called The Teacher's Guide to Special Education, a book put out by ASCD. And so a widely popular book. I think it was just purchased by Teach for America for Everyone, but it's a wildly popular book, but that's the section written there. We had field tested in 3 states about what's going on about that. So it's a really good thing. The next thing is not this past summer, but the summer before, Mitch Yell and I did a co-edited a special edition of the journal Teaching Exceptional Children. And we have a series of articles that were a part of that special edition for present level statements, background, least restrictive environment, make appropriate goal statements, placement, putting it all together, just update on the Andrew case, just all sorts of things relating to this. We'll send you those so that you can have them and disseminate them out to members of your team who might benefit. But it's good stuff. It really is. And so it was vetted. It's out there. I know they're getting it out, but please get them. Okay. More stuff. Just when you thought I was done with that part, is Mitch Yell and I co-authored a book that came out just a few months ago on legally compliant IEPs. Yes, we tend to be writing on a similar topic here like this, but I have some copies of some things from the appendix that I'm going to get you. And so we have available a timeline. What I mean a timeline is what to do a month before an IEP meeting, what to do 2 weeks before an IEP meeting, a week before an IEP meeting, the day before an IEP meeting, the morning of an IEP meeting, at the meeting, and 5 days after the IEP meeting. Steps like this. It wants to send it to you as a Word document so that you can modify, add, delete, whatever you think that might be beneficial for your team. Because too often teachers rush around and they say, oh, I don't know what I need to be doing. Well, this tells you this is what you do. You have to think about it as a process and not just something that comes magically together. There are steps that come into this. So it's a timeline of this. The next one is a questionnaire for IEP teams relating to transportation. And I'm involved in a lot of cases, but this is a sad one. There was a case involved where a child with a 6th grade boy with pretty significant needs relating to autism lived 1.25 miles from his school. And since he lived within a mile and a half of the school district decided not to, and he was able-bodied, decided not to provide him transportation and did not even discuss transportation. But they had his eighth grade sister walk him to and from school every day. And there was one day, and he started there in August, and then he was walking to and from school every day, just back and forth. There was a day in late February where he had to stay late from, his sister had to stay late from school. So she sent him on ahead. She sent him on ahead. You walk home, you know the way, things like this. He dropped a Pokemon card in the middle of a major road, was hit by a truck and killed instantly. And as a result, and I was involved in that case. I'm not telling you anything that was not in the papers. I was involved in that case, and as a result of that, I came up with a transportation questionnaire for IEP teams of questions you need to think about travel training, and pretty extensively. We went pretty hard on this one, where we also have it for kids with really significant disabilities about travel training, travel transportation, passing kids off, passing oxygen tanks or iPads. Who are responsible? Who are there? Things like this. Questions for teams to think about, because I don't want this to happen to another child. And I want to make sure that what we're providing for these kids is appropriate services, and transportation is a big thing. This also gets to the point where we have a lot of kids in school who fail bus. And I mean this literally, they fail bus. And what does it mean that they fail bus? Is they do something on the bus that causes them to have to stay home for 3 days. And in a perfect world, what these kids would do during those 3 days is that they would then spend the next 3 days spending time on YouTube, on Googling, or spending time how to ride a bus appropriately and watching those videos over and over again. Too often, though, what we do is we suspend the kids and we don't then provide them appropriate training on what to do, on how to act appropriately about this. And we have to think about this is what can we do to be of assistance so that kids can actually benefit from the bus ride, the time that's off, and then we provide them training, because they are sometimes lacking the necessary pre-skills that will provide them the supports or the ability to actually perform the behavior that we're expecting of them when they come back. So we have to analyze transportation very differently. The next one is a questionnaire relating to use of aides or paraprofessionals. There are 3 types of aides or paraprofessionals that we have. We have health, behavior, or educational instructional aides. And what we have to think about is these. So we have a questionnaire broadly, does a kid need an aide or paraprofessional? And then after that, we have specific questionnaires for this, for a health aide, specific questionnaire for behavioral aid, and specific questionnaire for an instructional aid for these kids, that can help you guide the amount of work this aide might need to do. Then also to constantly think about how we can then fade this person from this. This is a great service. This is a great assistance. Again, we field tested this in 3 states and it worked out really well. So it's, again, these are appendices from that book. We'll get them to you as Word documents that you can then benefit from. The last one, and this is something you can use the Google to find out. There was a movie called the Dyslexia Movie 2020. It's about 43 minutes long. It's based in Columbus, Ohio, and right outside Columbus, actually. And what you have to think about is, and it's free, I would recommend that you view this and just look at the emotions that these kids have relating to being diagnosed as an individual who has dyslexia and the supports that are necessary to provide this. Dyslexia is rearing its head in many, many ways. I know it's rearing its head in case conferences in Indiana, but you have to think about this, what we can do to provide supports for these kids, because it is a very real disability. Once you start watching this movie, you're not going to be able to stop. So just allocate the 43 minutes to do this, because it's emotional. The testimonials from the kids and the statements from the kids are powerful. And it's something that we absolutely need to take seriously. And we need to take seriously in many ways. So keep this in mind. So this is stuff that I provided to the IEP Resource Center. This is information that we can get to you. We'll make sure that you have access to this. But it's just good things. Everything I've shown you here is free stuff. Please get them out. Please get this information out to whomever might benefit on your team, and use those IRIS modules for professional development for your team as a part of this, because it can really benefit. Okay, so I'm actually going. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a short video, and This is a short video of a case. I was not involved in this case, but I was involved in a case where the teacher did almost exactly the same thing. And we have closed caption TV video of the teacher doing almost exactly the same thing. So this video is only about a minute long. Don't get too excited that you're going to get to sit and hang out and watch a video for a long time, but you could watch this video and pay attention to the behaviors of the teacher. All right, so here we go.
This is the video Angel Nelson saw of her 9-year-old son, Alan, dragged down a hallway by his teacher.
I was in shock and I was very traumatized for this to happen in front of all of his classmates.
The family's attorney subpoenaed the video after being told what happened. Nelson says Alan, who has autism, suffered a sprained wrist in the incident last October.
He had an outburst and they were trying to remove him from the classroom, but she restrained him the wrong way.
In the statement, the Greenup School District says it followed established safety protocol as soon as the situation became known. The teacher was removed from the school. The teacher is expected to be charged with 4th-degree assault tomorrow morning as the family now tries to heal, hoping no other parent has to see something like this.
And I never want this to happen to another child, ever.
Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News.
All right. Told you the video was short, but the images are powerful. So yes, I mean, just remind you, I was not involved in that. I was not involved in this case. There was a case in Kentucky, but I was involved in an almost exact same kind of fact pattern where we had CCTV video of a teacher dragging a kid through the hall. I'm not going to tell you this kid was a great kid. I'm not telling you that he had bad behaviors, but at no point should a kid be dragged down the hall. And I mean this. So why I'm showing you this video, and I really want you to think about this, is that I work with a lot of school districts. And one of the things I do with school districts is I try to analyze what was the problem and is there a way to prevent the problem from happening again? And I mean this. I literally mean this. Is I try to analyze it so that we learn from this. The analogy I make is that we need to take a plane crash approach instead of a car crash approach to things. And those of you who've been in car crashes, you understand we just basically move the car off the side, but we don't change the structure of the car. We don't change the training. We don't change anything about this. When there's a plane crash, we analyze it like crazy. We may change the design of the wing, how people getting out of the plane, the training for the pilots, all sorts of things. There's an extensive analysis as a part of this. And I appreciate that we take this very seriously. For those of you who've been in plane crashes, it's not pretty. I understand. I'd be happy to have a colloquy with you about that at some point, having survived one recently. So I just want to keep this in mind. But going back to this, because what I want to talk about is this case, exact same facts, same kid, so basically same behavior, teacher dragging a kid down the hall. This was the 4th teacher that they'd had in this building in the last year. And so what I did is I went in and I analyzed what was going on. Let me just give you the background facts here. It was a newly hired emergency certified teacher, brand new hired, had never had a class in special education before, was certified in social studies. Great, this is a great thing. Social studies is wonderful. We need more really good social studies teachers, but could not get a job as a social studies teacher, okay? Had just started an online special education certification program. And there are some really wonderful online special education certification programs. This is not a dig on special ed certification, online certification programs. Why I say this is the problem is what we often have is the classes that these teachers often start with is the intro to special ed course. Last semester I taught it. It was a bunch of 19-year-olds. And was teaching this thing. I was able to make up stuff all the time. Things that I said during the course of the semester, in fact, included like all kids with Down syndrome are left-handed, and they wrote that down. Or if you have a speech impediment, the easiest way to diagnose if you have a speech impediment is to look at a kid's left foot, and if they're missing a toe in their left foot, they're going to have a speech impediment. And so they write that down. I make up stuff that had nothing to tie it to. I straighten them out eventually if I remember. But why I say this is that's what the person was taking. They just started taking that online special ed course, Intro to Special Ed, which is basically taught as Disability of the Week. Not something that prepares or trains them to provide supports for kids as a part of a teaching job. Okay? This classroom had 10 students with pretty severe behavior problems, pretty significant behavior problems. And what's interesting about this is that I'm not saying these kids were great kids. I'm not saying these kids. I'm just being this out there. These kids had behavior problems. There was an aide who was assigned to the classroom. And we all know with the shortage of aides, it was before, it was pre-times, also now we have a shortage of aides. It's because we pay them crap. What's interesting about this is because my daughter worked as an aide in a classroom 2 years ago at a private school, and she was getting $25 an hour. Yep. And guaranteed 40 hours a week. And so, she lived at home. She basically was printing money. But I share this with you is the aide had been sick and would only been there for the first 3 days of the class, and they were not able to get an aide, and they actually had a policy that they didn't do substitute aides. So this teacher was in this class by herself, things like this. The students' behaviors were getting worse. The students' behaviors were getting significantly worse and causing significant problems, things like this. The teacher kept asking for help. The teacher kept asking for help and asking for assistance. And what you have to think about this is what we have to pay attention to is the teacher was calling out for help, but the principal refused to come observe. The principal refused to come observe because what did he say? He says, if I come down there and observe, I'm going to have a whole bunch of paperwork that I have to do. This is important. Okay. This was the fourth teacher that they'd had in the past year. This was a cycle that was repeating itself. And they were spending an enormous amount of time seeking out and hiring and doing a little bit of training for these teachers, not a whole bunch of training for these teachers, but we basically set this teacher up for failure. And so we set this teacher up for failure, and we're the ones who should be the ones who should be blamed for what's going on as a part of this. So what you have to think about this is make sure that you're providing appropriate supports for teachers so that they can do their jobs. And whenever a teacher asks for help, we need to make sure that we step in and provide appropriate help and provide appropriate assistance so that they can actually do their job and be effective. Because when I'm involved in litigation, I'm serious about this, all right? A teacher may have been a great teacher, fully certified, has a BCBA, 20 years of instruction. The same IEP that person is we have the same standards of IEP adequacy as opposed to the person's a brand new spanking hire who's never seen an IEP before, and the person writes an IEP. It's the court doesn't say, oh, this is a new hire, we'll give that leeway. That's not what happens. So you need to make sure that you provide appropriate training for individuals and appropriate support so that they can do their job effectively. So keep this in mind. All right. So keep this up. So why are we talking about this? And this is important. All right. Okay. So while we talk about this, and I'm going to talk more about principals here. I spend a lot of my time working with principals, spend a lot of my time training principals, dealing with answering questions from principals. And that's great because principals often don't feel like they have a place that they can go to for assistance. When I authored that book for CEC called The Principal's Guide to Special Education, wildly popular because in the vast majority of places across the United States, principals do not have to have any training or certification or coursework relating to kids eligible for special education. So it's important that we talk about this. All right. So why? Okay. Most principals are not prepared to be a building level administrator. They may have been a great teacher. And I'm not disputing that they've been a great teacher, things like this. But as I alluded to just a minute ago, there are no requirements in most states about whether they need to have any coursework relating to special education or any competencies as a part of their principal's training program. This is important. Why? Because even if they do have coursework, the coursework that they have is the Intro to Special Ed course, which, as those of you remember when you had it, was taught as Disability of the Week. Where you spend a week on intellectual disabilities, a week on hearing impairments, a week on visual impairments, a week on physical disabilities, a week on LD. Things like this. Then you get a week on all these things, but it really doesn't talk about the role and responsibilities that teachers or others have in providing services for kids eligible. It just talks a lot about the characteristics. And as I told you, I make up stuff all the time. My students would love it if I spent like 3 weeks on deaf and hearing impaired, because that's fun. And if you haven't seen the movie on Apple TV Plus called Coda, I recommend to see it. It's interesting language. I want to experience this. It's great fun. Or they would like to spend 3 weeks on physical disabilities and ride around in a wheelchair for a long time, things like this. Or spend time on visual impairments and blindness because it's something that they've seen in movies, things like this. But those who understand is the categories of deaf and hard of hearing, the category of blind or visually impaired individuals with physical disabilities are small in the overall prevalence numbers of special education. And so that's where we would want to spend our time, but we don't, we shouldn't. And so keep this in mind, okay? We also, and this is interesting, and this is why moving on through this outline here, is we have shortages of people wanting to become principals. And we don't have the replacements coming in, or what someone referred to as the backfill. We don't have people wanting to become principals as a part of this, because the principal's job is hard. And a lot of the basic skills that they need are not often things that we talk or have as a part of teaching. But that's why we look at you. You're a great teacher. You have a nice personality. Let's move you into the principal's role. We need to think about better ways of evaluating these individuals for this, but also how can we raise teachers up who have been good teachers and provide supports for them so they can be beneficial and move forward as a part of this. But principal prep is an important part of this. But for those who are looking for certification in principals, and keep this in mind, is that there is for lack of a better term, there's a race to the bottom on principal certification programs, all right? This certification to become principal is a low bar. It really is. It doesn't really give a lot of the competencies, and what you can see is these online programs are talking about giving you the bare minimum that's necessary so that you can become a principal. What is the bare minimum? The other place may require 9 classes. We can do it in 8. No, we can do it in 7. Not what? How about 6 and a field experience? Things like this. So we're reducing these things down to the bare minimum, what's necessary. And I don't blame the individuals wanting this, but it doesn't train them to do this. So we need to think about providing supports that can be beneficial on this. So keep this in mind as we talk about principals training and providing supports to make sure that principals understand their role and responsibility. Because for many parents, the principal is the face of the school district. They don't know who the superintendent is. I have to tell my dad that all the time, that they don't know who the superintendent is. They understand this. It's an important part of this role. Okay, so there are 4 phrases that I really want you to pay attention to as I go through this and talk about this. Because as we're working to provide supports for kids eligible for special education and your role as an administrator, there are 4 phrases that we absolutely need to keep in mind as a part of this. And yes, those who attended the FAPE session that Michelle and I did together, this slide was just copy and pasted, but it's significant because this is important. The first thing is that everything we do for a child needs to be based on the student's needs and the potential for growth, not based on the child's disability label. We have to have things based on the individual needs that a child has. The disability label is their ticket in the door, but it doesn't drive the services. And in no way should their disability label drive the services. The needs of the child and the individual needs of the child drive the services. For me, I'm involved in litigation all the time. Parents, and rightfully so, get upset about the label. The label for me is not, I don't fight over the label. I'll settle. Call a kid whatever you want. I don't care. It's the needs of the child that dictate the program and placement for the child. It's not the label that dictates this. So I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in due process hearings or threats of due process hearings, increasingly threats as a way of trying to save money from the parent attorneys, where parents absolutely reject the label of emotionally disturbed or seriously emotionally disturbed or behavior disorder, whatever we want to call it this week. They reject that, but they'll accept the category of LD. That's fine. Get the kid in as an LD, kid with LD. Write a program that's based on their needs, because the label does not dictate this. It really doesn't. And just remind your staff of that. Second, every single kid needs challenging, ambitious, and measurable goals that we need to make sure that we're pushing this child. And I can't emphasize this enough. And I can't emphasize enough that we need to put these kids to be challenged, and they need to be ambitious and move forward with this. And the last thing, it's got to be measurable. If you have a goal that's not measurable, it don't count. And I mean that pun. Because if you can't graph the little sucker, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, move from there. Okay. Third thing is the child needs to make progress. Now, progress appropriate in light of the student's circumstances. I'm well aware of that. I mean, the best example I can give to you is my brother-in-law is labeled as having profound intellectual disabilities. He needs help toileting. He's nonverbal. He needs help getting dressed. I could work 80 hours a week with him, doing my best services, what apps, the best things like this. And he's still not going to make a year's worth of progress. But what he is hopefully going to make progress on some of his goals that we have for him. And we've moved towards Velcro shoes to help him. He can put his own shoes on it somewhat. He can do his own seatbelt. We're pretty excited about that. And it's interesting about these 63 years of age. But I share this with you is it's based on the student's circumstances, based on the student's unique circumstances, but the child needs to be making progress. Too often we blame the disability for the child's disability, we blame the disability for the child not making progress. The disability is just the start of the conversation. It really is. It's just the start of the conversation where we have to think about our creative and innovative ways that we then move that child forward. And that's what's important. And the last thing is internal consistency. The IEP needs to have internal consistency. And what do I mean by that? If you have a child who has needs that say they have behavior needs, you surely better have some behavioral goals that address that behavior needs, or something in the IEP that's addressing the behavior needs, something that improves the services for the child. Absolutely, you need this. Absolutely, you need to have something there that will benefit the child. And I mean this literally, is that you need to have something that's going to move and benefit something along this. But it's consistent. So how I do IEP reviews, and I've got a whole flurry of IEPs coming in tomorrow. For those, we're taping this on a Wednesday. It's coming in on Thursday. Typically, I get them on Thursday, and then I meet with the teams, the IEP teams, on Mondays afterwards. It's just how the schedule that I've worked out with several attorneys. But basically, I look through the present level statement, and I go through the present level statement, and I list off all the needs that this child has where their supports are necessary. Then I go through the IEP and make sure that those needs are all addressed and make sure that they're there. So I flow from the present levels to the need for how we're addressing them, goals, statements, whatever we're going to be doing as part of this. Then I go backwards and make sure for every goal that there is a need that ties to it. So it's a two-way street on this, but there's got to be internal consistency. And there needs to be efforts on this, right? Wait, there's more, okay? So monitoring, okay? This is something you're going to hear me say multiple times throughout the course of this session and other sessions I do for the Focus on Inclusion conference. Is for those of you who came, and I understand why. Don't worry, all right? Is you need to make sure that you have student progress. If you don't have data, I advise the district to settle. I do a lot of witness preparation. We talk to individuals and walk through data and what they need as a part of this. I enjoy witness preparation for speech pathologists because they pretty much take data every single time. It's an ASHA requirement. A lot of school psychs I do because we often start with when we present our cases, we start with school psychs presenting what's going on. And so I do witness preparation with school psychs and testimony, expert witness kinds of things like this, and walk through the process of what they need to clarify what's going on and make sure that what's going on. But then we need to make sure we have data, because I'm not going to recommend, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, to put a teacher on the witness stand who does not have data, because they're going to be drawn and quartered. And it's an analogy from the 1600s. Go ahead, imagine it as you want. But it's interesting about this is what we have as part of this is you need to make sure that you have data, and you need to have data of what's going on. Okay, so moving on. Okay. Earlier, I said that I do an analysis. I do an analysis of the case and what you think about this. And so that case that I gave you, where the kid was dragged down the hall, things like this. It's a six-step process. Six-step process. I'll go through it really quickly. Six-step process that you should pay attention to whenever there's a complaint, whenever a parent issues an email that's explaining that my child's not making progress, whatever. Learn about this and see how this. Yes, it takes some time, but you will benefit dramatically from this. First, learn about the complaint. Learn every single thing you can about this complaint and learn what is going on with this complaint, where we are with this. Second, this complaint, does this apply to other children? I'm willing to bet that if you have a kid who has a poorly written IEP for one kid, there's going to be a poorly written IEP for another kid. Or if you don't have progress monitoring data on one kid, you're going to not have progress monitoring data on another child. So if you have a parent who makes a complaint about something, then you need to think about this very seriously. Think about this very seriously and see what is going on here. Third, why did this happen? Did we not provide enough training? Is there not enough supports? Is the teacher's caseload huge? What is going, why did this happen? So if the teacher wrote an inappropriate IEP, did we not provide the teacher enough supports, enough guidance about how to actually do an appropriate IEP? Is there something we need to think about this? Okay. So we have to think about what can we do as a part of this to provide appropriate supports and provide appropriate assistance to help the child make progress, things like this. Okay. Next, after we learn why did this happen, is training necessary? Do we need to provide additional training so that this doesn't happen? And not just for this teacher, but for other staff. Learn from what's going on. Okay. Learn about this, make sure we provide the training to whoever might benefit from this. Next, are changes necessary? Are changes necessary so that this doesn't happen? Do we need to change how we hire paraprofessionals? Do we need to train how we provide supports for paraprofessionals? Do we need to change how we onboard teachers into our IEP system, or how we actually what's going on? Or do we have better training with principals about the monitoring of process, things like this? Are changes necessary, things like this, where we're going with this? And what can be done to make sure this never happens to another child? And that's an important process that we need to pay attention to. And why? Because then you can go to your school board and say, we've learned from this. We've benefited from this. We've learned, we had a mistake, we've changed, we've altered this. We're less likely to have problems in this in the future. You can say that and reduce this every single time you do this, things will get better. Can we reduce all of litigation? I don't think so. It'd be great if we could, but I don't think you're going to be able to. It'd be really nice, but this is something we need to think about this. But whenever you have a complaint, pay attention to this and learn from this and there's things about this, but pay attention to this. Like more, okay? Before we begin, I'm just going to talk about this real fast. And we have documents we're going to send to you on the Ender Supreme Court case. We have the decision. We have the FAQ from the U.S. Department of Education. We have the pieces that Mitch and I did for the Journal Teaching Exceptional Children. We have the IRIS modules that also reference this. But this provides information about this. And so what do we really want? You can see. You've seen these phrases before. Well, we need to enable the child to make progress. That is your responsibility. If the child is not making progress, then you need to change something. We'll come back to that in a minute. Students must have challenging goals that are appropriately ambitious and academic and functional advancement. Not just regular advancement, functional advancement. Make sure that we're moving things forward as we absolutely can with this child. Keep that in mind. All right, next. Procedural requirements. We pass out the procedural safeguards notice like candy. And the variety of things. And so when I told you earlier that all the things I was provide to you were not things that cause you to get sleep, procedural safeguards notice, read that, it'll put you to sleep. But parents don't read these things. They don't read them, but they're designed to protect the rights of parents. Now, what's interesting about this, many of you may have iTunes or accounts or Apple iPhones. I bet you don't read the procedural safeguards notices that go along with those. The same thing, we don't read the procedural safeguards notice. Like when I go to Jiffy Lube, I don't read their notices, things like this. All I get is a little sticker that goes in my upper left-hand part of my windshield that I completely ignore that tells me when to come back. Then I'm not going to come back at that time. I'm going to come back when I want to come back. And so we have to think about this is the procedural safeguards talk about the how and when of the IDEA. And this is it's a process law. And so we have to think about this is make sure that we are involving the parents. Treat the parents with respect. I can't tell you about this enough. The parents need to be treated with respect. They are very, very, very important members of the team. And I mean this literally. They are very, very important, very, very, very important members of the team. Let me make sure I say all three. They're very, very, very important members of the team, and we need to treat them with respect and honor them and pay attention to them as a part of this. But make sure that we involve them as a part of the process where there's no surprises. And I can't emphasize that enough because many of the due process hearings in which I'm involved in are where parents were first not treated with respect, but there's been a communication breakdown. There's been a communication breakdown, and then we have to think about how to move this forward. So some of all this, things like this, just make sure that we involve the parents, just basically general notification rights. We get the parents there, we get the parents that participate, notification of IEP meetings. The other things, make sure that you do your absolute best and this is something I don't often say when talking about special education, but I say it here, that we do our absolute best to get a draft copy of the IEP to the parents a few days in advance. Just to make sure it says draft on every single page. And then we get a draft copy to the parents so that they can review it if they want. And if you can get like an 85 or 90% draft of everything because you're missing the general education teacher statement, if you're missing that, remember I showed you a model for that, we'll send you. But if you're missing that, then you get them the 90% draft, whatever you've got at that point. And then when you start the meeting, you talk about the difference between the draft that you're walking into the meeting versus what you provided for them. But involve the parents, get them the opportunity to review things ahead of time so that they can be there, things like this. But get the parents involved. And increasingly with parents taking weird shifts at different businesses because they're trying to make it through the day, involve the parents. It may take 3-4 meetings, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Involve the parents, listen to the parents. One thing that I do with every single IEP meeting that I participate in is I start every single one with parents, tell us about your child. And I really do mean this. Parents, tell us about your child because it grounds us. It reminds us that we're there to talk about a child. We're there to talk about a child who has issues, and I want to hear the parent's perspective. And I truly mean this. And why I say this is I only go to contentious IEP meetings. I don't go to the happy ones. I'm brought in on I often have to lead the really contentious ones. It's a fun-filled fact. But I lead the really contentious ones, and we kind of go through this, but it's an important part. Make sure you treat the parents with respect. And then one other thing about this is at the end of the meeting, assign someone from your team, it may be you, assign someone from your team or the case manager or the teacher to contact the parents 4 or 5 days after the meeting, and then talk with them. Just contact them and ask them, do they have any questions or concerns that they have thought of since the meeting? Right? Because the nature of adult learning is that you think of things when the anxiety or pressure is reduced. Think about this. Every one of you when you've been in an argument, when you're part of the argument and then you go away, then about 8, 12, 14 hours later, it's mostly the middle of the night, you roll over and say, should have said that, and things like this. Many parents feel a lot of pressure when they're at these IEP meetings, and they feel a lot of anxiety as a part of what's going on. So contact the parents, ask them if there's anything else about this. It keeps the lines of communication open and involves the parents appropriately in the process. So keep this in mind as we talk about this. Okay, more. Okay. Remember in the pre-times? This was almost exactly 2 years ago. We were all just, there was some things like this, and we should start washing our hands more. We really didn't understand the concept of social distancing. What the heck was that? We didn't understand the concept of, or many of us were not as familiar with the Zoom machine as we are now, or Google Hangout, or our Teams, or whatever platform that you happen to use. But just what is normal school going to be like? I'm not sure. I really don't know about this. Okay. And then parents that spend a lot of time working with their kids, and many spend a lot of time having to teach their kids at home and things like this. And you can see this. So what we have to remind ourselves as a part of administrative support for kids is that parents are dealing with a lot of things that they are not necessarily happy with, and they're dealing with a normalcy that we're not sure that they want to embrace. Okay. But here, some basic tips as a part of this. The first one is that, yes, we've all been under a pandemic for the last 23 months, okay? But our experience has been very, very different from each other's, okay? When the pandemic hit, I shut down all my travel. I had to cancel a whole bunch of flights. My wife shut down all of her travel, things like this, and she does presentations. And we stayed at home, and the two of us, we lived in our house, just the two of us, and we had a good time. We had our food delivered. We had snacks in the afternoons together. We took naps. We had dinners. We had long walks with the dog because no one wanted to walk with us. We actually had a good time, all right? Because we continued our jobs. I think I worked harder once the pandemic started. But I share this with you, is a lot of people did not have positive experiences. There's people who have lost lives. There's people who've lost family members. There's people who've been really sick. I mean, when I had COVID, it was terrible. It was a terrible experience. But I've shared this with you, and it's not something that I would wish on anyone. My experience. And so what we have to think about this is be compassionate, because there's people who've lost their jobs and things like this. So the experience has been very different. The second thing, though, is focus on the laws. Focus on the laws because the law has not changed. Your obligation is to provide a free, appropriate public education to kids under the IDEA. And IDEA has not been reauthorized, and their laws relating to this have not changed. So your obligation on this, and there's not wiggle room saying, oh, I'm sorry, we just couldn't really get to your kid during these past 2 years. That's not going to hold up. So focus on the laws and focus on laws, things like this. The last two, and realize these go hand in hand. Right? Go hand in hand as a part of this is you need to make sure that you are a decent human being when parents are frustrated with this. And yes, there are some individuals who are frustrated with mask requirements. I've been into a number of school board meetings. I wrote that book, a School Board Members Guide to Special Education. It's at CEC's website, and so I've been presenting to school boards members about special education. And they like it when I come in and talk about this because I'm not talking about CRT or masks. But I share this with you is, but be a decent human being, but also be helpful and talk about the resources and what you can do to be of assistance for this. Because in many places, educators are the rock for some of these kids. And you're the most stable parts of some of these kids' lives. And so I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I've been proud of what education has been working to try to do over the past 23 months to do this. So keep that in mind, okay? More, okay? Child fine. Child fine is what you need to do as a part of this, as we provide supports for general education teachers and things, is make sure that general education teachers are aware when there's a child out there that may be having problems. And I mean this literally, is that you need to highlight for the general education teachers their role and responsibility of highlighting what they need to do to keep people informed about what's going on. And I mean this is that you have to think about this is where we can see things about this is and it's really difficult about what we can do, but make sure that they are aware of what we can do to provide supports. Okay. Well, we still have a child fine obligation. Okay. Just a funny thing. This is actual school psych doing classroom observations this past fall because we're believing in social distancing. Luckily, we have, and I applaud the school psychs who've been very creative about getting information and been very creative about getting this and things like this. Okay. But child fine more child fine. Right. What we have to think about is documenting the plan that we have, documenting the plan about obtaining the needed information and completing the eligibility process. This is important. What we have to think about this. That's why we included earlier the statement for general education teachers about what they need to do to provide supports and write-ups on children so that you get this out to whomever might benefit, things like this, but provide supports because kids are leading very different lives. And I mean this literally, okay? There are some kids who are coming to school completely and totally prepared for education. And there's some kids who during the pandemic were part of learning pods. The parents hired tutors and provided supports and had bought online training programs and things like this. There are some kids who got a lot of supports and training during the pandemic. There's other kids who did not. Keep this in mind, all right? So, and there's some kids who have been going hungry. And think about this. We talked about this in summer. This was happened to be in Miami Beach during spring break week a few years ago. Yeah, I don't recommend you doing it. But I was in Miami Beach during spring break week, and you can see summer isn't fun when you're hungry. And I mean this literally. But we're dealing with this. And the kids who are experiencing trauma as a result of COVID, because when we talk about trauma, one thing that I want you to pay attention to as a part of trauma is the big marker that we look at is called the adverse childhood experiences. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say the last 23 months have been an adverse childhood experience for many of these kids. And so what you have to think about is what can we do to provide supports? And so trauma is, this was on the front page of the Huffington Post, and that while advertising weighted blankets for kids, I'm not making this up, okay? But you keep this in mind as we talk about this and keep this in mind as we go with this, all right? But get the general education teachers involved. So what I have for you is real quickly, this is the info from the gen ed teachers that I'm going to send you. Statement about any forms, any things like this. You can see it. You'll see the documents, student strengths, list of concerns, how the student compares to average kids, anything out of the ordinary, grades, things like this. And then an actual write-up. Positive self, what are the student's strengths? What are the student's concerns? How does the student compare to others? Grades, factors affecting class schedule, accommodations or modifications, things like this that might be working with the kid. And so there's a variety of things like this. And then more, okay? How does the student compare to others? Okay. How does the student think about where we are with this? But this is a document, and again, this is a document where we have that we can send you. This will be benefit you. Again, it's from chapter 2 of the Teacher's Guide to Special Education from ASCD. And what it's got great information in there on how to actually do this. It's got good information because gen ed teachers need this kinds of things. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears. And I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit more about trauma. And why I want to talk about trauma is that what I refer to again is the ACEs and the adverse childhood experiences that many of these kids have experienced. But you can see this. And there is some discussion, and I was talking with a good friend of mine at the National Association of School Psychologists who was talking about that almost the characteristics of the kids who have experienced trauma, almost as if they should be a special education category in and of themselves because of the unique needs. But look at this. Look about these lists of behaviors. This is just a list of behaviors that kids who have experienced trauma are having. And I'm betting that you have a lot of kids out there who ever experienced this. Difficulty with memory, reduced cognitive capacity, sleep disturbance, language delays, impulsive actions, need for attention, withdrawal, attachment difficulties, poor peer relationships. The trauma is a very real thing that we need to take seriously. And we need to think about what we're doing as a part of this. Why do we need to take this seriously? But look at this, okay? They're 2.5 times more likely to fail a grade. More receptive language difficulties, more expressive language disabilities. And this is where it comes to special education. Many of these kids are suspended more often, they're expelled more often. But as a result, they have lower scores, but more eligibility for special education. So what I want you to think about this, and I want you to take back to your team, is I really want you to take back to your team is think differently about these kids. And I mean this literally. And think about the needs of these kids and all the kids within your school. And think about this. Think about this. The current model. The current model really is, okay? The current model is, what's wrong with you? Okay, new model, what happened? And I want you to just think a little differently. I got another thing I'm going to have you actually implore you to think differently about this in a minute, but I want you to think differently about this. But what you think about this is we may never know, okay? We may never know. The trauma may never be identified. The history may never be identified. Classmates be traumatized. They may not know. So what we have to think about this broadly is the issues about this. We may never know what's going on. Don't let that stop you from working. Don't let that stop you from trying. Focus on the whole school. What are the issues in your town? What are the issues in your school? What are the issues we have to provide supports? And what teachers need to provide, identify and ensure safety, trust, and security. And then continue use of data. More on this later, but all behavior is communication. And I mean this, that all behavior is communication, as you have to think about this, okay? So you have to think about where we can do about this is attention is providing supports that we can provide things on this. But what we think about this is focus on the basics. Make sure kids have this, that they have good access to food. Make sure that, because I know a number of you work with your school counselors to slip food into kids' backpacks on Fridays so that the kids get some sustenance over the weekends. It's not like you advertise it. It's some of these kids are also, you do clothing drives for winter jackets and boots for these kids and gloves and hats for these kids. Some of these kids are not getting appropriate sleep. Some of these kids are not sure where they're sleeping at night. So it's hard to focus on homework when you aren't sleeping so good. So keep these in mind. The security, the safety, and relationships and friends. School needs to be a safe, nurturing environment where we provide instruction. I realize that's not why many of us got into education, but that's something we need to do, and that's our role and responsibility as a part of the process. We need to think about this. So what can we do as teachers is we need to make sure we provide safety to these kids. We provide autonomy, provide choice and control to these kids. So we help with what they can do as a part of this and think about what we can do and be consistent as a part of this. It's something that we need to think about as a part of including these kids and supporting these kids. Wait, there's more, okay? So safety, security, nurturing, all teachers need to focus on this and reflect, how can I do a better job of providing safety, security, and nurturing for these kids? And reflect on this as a part of this, okay? More, okay? So safety. Children eligible for special education and related services and eligible under Section 504 are disproportionately bullied. So what we have to think about is how can we reduce bullying? How can we reduce bullying so that and take this very seriously? We have a number of kids who are missing buses because they don't want to be bullied on the way to and from school. on the bus. We have kids who are being bullied on playgrounds. We have kids being bullied on down the hall. We need to be models of this and reduce this. Second, we need to make sure we have clear and consistent rules for these kids and provide supports for these kids and help as a part of this. And we think about this, provide a predictable schedule also, and be supportive for what we're doing, but a daily schedule that supports them. And then check the classroom to make sure that the kids are getting what they need as a part of their day-to-day life, and make sure that we're providing consistent with this. But if you notice a kid is not getting supports or seems to having some problems, make sure that others in your building are aware of this. And then we talk about this. Maybe others are aware, or the school counselor can gather more information, or the school nurse is aware of something. Not that I'm asking you to violate or them to violate HIPAA, but what I want you to think about is make sure that others are aware that you're noticing something. And that's important as a part of this. Keep this in mind as we pay attention to this more. Relationships, right? Okay. So we should think about this: trust, security, safety, consistency. It's not just school conversations. I think I was my best. And I'm not a huge fan of professional wrestling, but I spent a lot of my time on Mondays when I was a teacher talking with my kids just for the first few minutes of each class, talking with them about the professional wrestling match that they had watched over the weekend. They loved what happened in the squared circle. They enjoyed it. It was immense. Things like this. I did not allow them to demonstrate a suplex in my classroom or a full Nelson, but I did not. But they wanted to talk about this. And many of these kids don't get opportunities to talk about things other than schoolwork. It's too often, where's your homework? Sit down, be quiet, things like this. Talk about what the kids want to talk about. Just did that for a few minutes on Mondays. And then when I worked in Kansas, we talked about NASCAR. And the fact that I love track and field, going round and round in circle, things like this. So there's some close parallels. But I share this with you. I talked about what kids wanted to talk about as opposed to always talking about what I wanted to talk about. Build those relationships. Okay, more. And I'm going to start flying through this really quickly, but you'll have access to this. Responsive teacher behaviors. What you need to think about is behaviors that you can do with the kids with whom you work with. Okay, talk about where you are with this and talk about what you can spend your time working with these kids. Responsive creates and maintains consistent daily routines, tells children when something out of the ordinary is about to occur, anticipates difficult periods, supports student self-regulation, is appropriately nurturing, provides guidance, and has goals for achievement and tries to help the kids move forward. These are all important things that we can pay attention to. And these are all important things that we need to address and provide supports so that we can be best about where we are with this. Okay, more. Teacher reported behaviors. Here are some behaviors we see from kids. And these are behaviors we highlighted a few minutes ago, but these are behaviors that we see when teachers talk about the kids who experience trauma, things like this. Keep these in mind as we talk about this and start addressing these, right? More. And when you see these behaviors, what do we often diagnose? Here we got them. LD, EBD, ADHD, ODD, OCD, ASD, PTSD, RAD, and just grieving kinds of things. Yes, I can spew acronyms. But it's interesting about this is when I share this with you is that we often diagnose these kids, but that doesn't often get to the kids with what we're doing. And what we have to think about this is provide supports for this. Okay, more. Okay. And you can see, I'm a huge fan of behaviorism. My daughter's about to get her BCBA credentials. How much do I have to eat to be eligible for dessert? That's how a lot of kids think about these things. And what we have to think about is going to where they are and paying attention to them and pay attention to where we are with this. Okay. So if you learn there's two things. There's two absolute things that I want you to learn from what I'm talking about. The first thing, and I didn't highlight this enough, I highlighted this in one of the sessions I did with Michelle. If you haven't had a chance to go observe that one, I do highly recommend it to you, things like this. The first thing, if you have a child who is not making progress for whatever reason, if a child's not making progress in your goals or curriculum, whatever, or behaviors, what the absolute thing you need to do is you need to change something. And I mean this literally. Change something. Change the grouping, change the seating, change the intensity, change the reading material, change the amount of time, change the time of the day, change something, and then document that and see if that works. And I would genuinely appreciate it if we just changed one thing and that would solve all the problems. But we know that's not what happens. We often need to change multiple things. So what do? Change something. Because a lot of the lawsuits that I'm involved in, where districts knew or should have known that the child was not making progress or doing well, and they didn't do anything about this. And that's, I'm very serious. A lot of the lawsuits that I'm involved, that's the biggest trigger. So get your districts to pay attention to when there's a problem. Okay. So if you can learn that one thing, you'll do great. The second thing I want you to learn is every time you think of calling a kid attention seeking this year, consider changing it to connection seeking and see how your perspective changes. And I mean this literally. Is that kids are seeking connections. There are kids out there who are not getting really good connections with what's going on. And so what we have to think about is what can we do to provide them connections and provide them opportunities for involvement. When I said earlier today, when I part of this, is I said that I start every single meeting, well, IEP meeting, often the very contentious ones, but I start every single meeting with parent, tell me about your child. There was one, I remember this real specifically, it was in the September in the pre-times, where we're sitting there and we had a really good reading IEP for a child because the child had all sorts of reading problems. It was the end of September of a third grade girl's life, okay? And we sit there, parent, tell us about your child, okay? The parent started talking pretty extensively about how her daughter, Christina, had no friends. No one wanted to interact with Christina. No one sat near Christina. No one sat on the bus. No one talked to her on the playground. No one ate lunch with her, things like this. We were there to talk. She said, I know we're here to talk about reading, but my biggest concern is we've got a child who has no friends and doesn't want to come to school. We have a 9-year-old who doesn't want to come to school. That's going to be that's a lot of years of suffering for this child. So what we did is we changed the whole dynamics. Luckily, we're within the timelines, we could do this. Well, we changed the whole dynamics of that IEP meeting. We sat there and talked about cooperative learning, cooperative group activities, how the teacher could do this, what we could do to provide supports, things like this. And we deferred the reading goals to talk about to about 3 weeks later. Yes, we were still in the timelines. It doesn't happen that often. But we came, things like this, we put a plan in place. We came back 3 weeks later, parent says, I'm now ready to talk about reading because someone sits with my daughter on the bus, someone's sitting with her on at lunch, and she has people who talk with her on the playground. My daughter wants to come to school now. She was seeking connections. And I can't tell you how important that is for kids because many of these kids talk about how lonely they are. And what we have to do as a part of our lives is provide supports for them and provide assistance so that they can be available and participate in what's going on. All right. So last thing here. All right. This is my contact information. Well, it doesn't have my contact information. I apologize. All right. My contact information here, but my email address is davidbateman@me.com. I'm taking a leave from my university at Shippensburg. I'm working on, as I said, I'm working on that case in Oregon right now. Contact me with questions, contact me with concerns. I appreciate that what you're doing, and I appreciate where you are, and I appreciate all the supports you're providing. Educators are helping us get through this, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. So thank you very much. We will make sure that all the documents that I said we will have available for you. We'll figure out a way to get that to you, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And again, stay safe and enjoy yourself. Thank you very much.